Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Friday, December 27th around here. Hope everyone had a great Christmas, and we have a great show for you today. Want to make sure I get a little bit of an early look at all those CFP quarterfinal games coming up early next week. We'll do some picks early next week, probably do Boise State, Penn State on Monday, the rest of them on Tuesday if I had to imagine. I'll let you know a little bit more detail once we get to those days, but definitely want to get a little bit of an early look at all those games, just roll through that really quickly. We'll get to some big-time bowl games that are coming up this upcoming weekend. My favorite of the bunch is Vandy, Georgia Tech. We'll pick that one. Iowa State, Miami, BYU, Colorado, a ton of really fun games. We'll pick about 4 of the really good ones on today's show. Then we'll get into all the rest of the bowl games. It's been absolute chaos all around the bowl season right now. We have multiple overtime games to talk about. We have multiple down to the wire, and then we'll update you on all the ones coming up this weekend. Then we got the transfer portal. We still have a ton of guys walking in and out of the transfer portal. Been tempering down just a little bit the last week or so, but definitely a big time commitments coming all over the place that I want to make sure you guys are updated on. And then we'll just do a little bit of a weekend wrap up. We have a little bit of news around a coaching job that will make 2025 just that little bit more interesting. We have that Dion Bowl insurance that came out, and Ryan Day seems like he is safe regardless of what happened, and regardless of what happened in that Tennessee game. Sounded like he was safe regardless. So a lot of things to touch on at the very end there. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $sign, add any question, comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so utilize that, especially as we get up to these quarterfinal games. Any questions you have about those, you're more than welcome to utilize that, and it'll pop up on the screen. We can have fun back and forth here. But let's get into this. Let's do a little bit of an early look at all the CFP quarterfinals. We got 4 really fun games. We have 2 that might be a little bit more blowout territory, at least in terms of the lines, and then we have 2 that could just be downright classics. And let's go ahead and jump into this, and we'll start with the one that is getting us kicked off. On New Year's Eve, we get Penn State, Boise State, and this is a really fascinating game. I think a lot of people pretty much all week are going to be telling you, or all weekend, are going to be telling you that Penn State's going to win this one, and they're going to win this one by 21. And you'll figure out where I stand on that on Monday, but it is an interesting game. You know, the big question that you have going into this one is, can Boise State do to Penn State what they did to Oregon early in the year? Can they keep things close? Can they force them into tough positions? And if they don't have the firepower that maybe Oregon has passing the ball, can they take advantage of that? Can they find a little bit more opening against Penn State than they did against Oregon? And they pushed Oregon to the very wire. Oregon had to get a field goal late to win that one. Maybe Boise State can do the same thing here. Obviously, a little bit hard to know how much that will play into this one because that was all the way back in week 2. So a little bit hard to tell just how much that will really play into this one, just how much that will show up in this one. But it's definitely something to watch. Now, Penn State will be ready for Ashton Jeanty as well as you can be ready for Ashton Jeanty. They have one of the best run defenses in the entire country. They will be stacking the box. Now, they probably won't have to do it quite as much as those Mountain West opponents did against him, but they're still going to have to do it. Even against Oregon, they were going to have to do it in some way or another to make sure they got this guy on the ground. It's incredibly hard to. And when you talk about this Boise State team as you move forward throughout this tournament, and there's a lot of questions about what they can do throughout this thing, how much of an impact can they make? Are they going to roll out of the tournament this week or this upcoming week by 21 points and we're not going to think about it too much? Or can they push this team? From where I'm standing, I think it really comes down to Ashton Jeanty having an incredible game, and then that D-line of Boise State. They have 51 sacks on the year. They can absolutely get after the quarterback, including a guy from the back end. NCU Oladipo, very, very talented pass rusher, even from that safety position. So Boise State can get after the pass rusher. They do a great job of setting up different pressures. Jaden Virgin Morgan is an absolute problem on the outside. So is Hamad Hassanin. Very, very talented players on this defensive line for Boise State. Penn State's got a great offensive line. That has not been an issue for them this year. They have talented guys across that group. This is a really, really talented defensive line for Boise State, and it's one of those things where it might just come down to Ashton Jeanty having a ridiculous day where he goes for over 200 yards, rushes for 2 touchdowns, really gets this offense moving, and then that D-line just disrupting Drew Aller, forcing a couple of mistakes, getting a couple of bounce of ball plays, and hoping that you come out on top in this thing. So that's going to be the big question on that side. Can Boise State match them up front with their defensive line to Penn State's offensive line? The issue with that is you can't commit more guys to that front, because when you talk about the back end for Boise State, they give up 250 yards passing per game. Drew Aller in a dome is not someone you want to face. I can promise you that. He absolutely can sling the rock around. We saw what he did in the Big Ten championship. He can do that and more in this one, definitely, because he's a very, very talented player. Didn't have the best day against SMU, was definitely very off, a little bit inaccurate. I tend to believe that had a lot to do with the cold more than anything else. I think once he gets into a dome, he's going to be able to let it rip, and this is a defense that you should be able to do that against. So for Boise State, it comes down to number 2. I think we all understand that if Ashton Jeanty has a big-time day, they have a shot to at least hang around in this game. They're going to need a lot of help from that defensive line, trying to hold up against that offensive line and maybe make a couple of plays, force a couple of mistakes from Drew Aller, and then on the other side, it's kind of just attack as usual. Do what you do, kind of do the thing kind of you did in the Big Ten championship, attack through the air when you need to, but you should be able to establish the run pretty solidly in this game. It'll be really interesting to see how all this unfolds, but this is the one that a lot of people are looking at a little bit sideways, thinking that it might get a little bit aggressive towards Penn State's direction. When you have the best guy on the field, best player on the field like Boise State does, you're always going to have a shot in these games. So it's going to be fascinating to watch this one unfold. And then you get to the other one that is actually a bigger line than the last one that we saw, which was a little bit surprising to me. I'll be totally honest. I think they're probably not going to lose money on the way that Texas is playing right now, but at the end of the day, I thought this would be a little bit closer than the one that we just talked about, but it's 13.5 for Texas in this one. They're making their way over to Atlanta. I actually will be at that game, so very, very excited for that experience, but they're looking for a chance to go play for a chance to win the national title in the Cotton Bowl, a place that they're very, very comfortable in Dallas. They'll definitely win the fan battle between Oregon or Ohio State, no matter who they play. So they would love to win this one. They would love to go to that semifinal and have a little bit of home field advantage in the process. For Arizona State, they've become one of the fan favorites in college football. There's no doubt about that, and it's all about Cam Skattebo, really. He's the first player since 2016 to have 1,500 rush yards and 500 receiving yards in the same year. Remarkable player, remarkable year for him, and it's going to be the matchup of the day. It might just be the matchup of this entire round is going to be the Texas defensive front against Cam Skattebo. It's a top 10 run defense for Texas. They are absolutely incredible in the interior there, and the Arizona State offensive line has been absolutely great this year. This is going to be the biggest challenge by a pretty comfortable margin that they've had all year. So it's going to be a really fun battle. I think Cam Skattebo is that guy that everyone describes him as a bowling ball with chainsaws attached to him. That's exactly what he is. He's a nightmare to tackle, and even if you're Texas, even if you have all the advantages in the world when it comes to physicality and size, he's going to be a nightmare to get on the ground. Arizona State is fantastic at stopping the run as well, and we saw it against Clemson. That is what makes this Texas offense special. If they can run the football, Quinn Ewers is going to be able to do what he wants to do. He's going to be able to handle his business. As long as they're going to be able to run the ball, as long as they can keep this defensive line at bay, they should be able to in some respects, but this is a very solid group on the other side facing a incredibly solid group from Texas, that offensive line. So that's going to be a really fun battle here as well. Who can get that run game going, and whoever does, it's going to be really hard to stop that offense, especially with Cam Skattebo in Arizona State. And then you look to the other side of things. You go to the run game, that's probably going to be a fun battle, no doubt about that. It'll be interesting to see where that goes, but maybe it's the passing game that really makes a difference in this one. When you have two very, very talented defensive front and offensive fronts, maybe it just comes down to the couple of pop plays, and Quinn Ewers will be under a microscope again in this game. People will continue to talk about Arch Manning. They'll continue to talk about that package. It didn't work out very well for them against Clemson, but absolutely I expect it to be something that they continue to unlock just a little bit more throughout this tournament. Arizona State is attackable on the back end. 215 yards allowed per game through the air. They're a team that absolutely can make a lot of plays, but if Quinn Ewers gets into a groove and that run game gets going, it might just be too much for Arizona State to keep up with. But another fun storyline going into this one, we talked about it going into the Clemson-Texas game. Tons of overlap between these two teams when you go all the way back to high school. This one, you don't have to go quite as far back. There are a number of former Texas players that are on that Arizona State team now. Jake Smith, who should get some run with Jordan Tyson not being in the lineup. Xavier Alford, kind of the leader of that back end of that defense. Prince Dorba, very talented edge rusher for Arizona State. All made their way over from Texas, and plenty more. Zach Swanson, a very talented defensive tackle that seems like he's very excited for this game. Really, really wants to show Texas that he absolutely can play with them. But this will be a really fun subplot to watch. It feels like Texas has plenty of tie-ins all over the place. If they play Ohio State next time around, it'll be Quinn Ewers in his time at Ohio State and then at Texas. But we'll get into that obviously in time. There's going to be an incredible game that could be a little bit closer than that number if I had to imagine. But let's get to Ohio State, Oregon. This is the one. I don't think it needs much introduction if I'm being totally honest, because we saw that game all the way back in the oh my gosh, how long ago was that? October, I believe. October 19th. Incredible game between these two. Came down to a matter of moments with that Will Howard slide that just went on just a little bit too long. But it's a remarkable game, and it's going to be an absolutely incredible one. Oregon hasn't played since that Big Ten title, and I think the biggest thing that stood out to all of us when we were watching that is this Oregon defense can be attacked. It's definitely a defense that is very talented, is very good, but when they face a team that's really rolling, I mean, Penn State had over 500 yards total, almost 300 yards on the ground. That's something Ohio State's not going to shy away from. That being said, you still have the big question about that offensive line. They did an incredible job against a remarkably good group in Tennessee. Frankly, what I tend to believe is the best defensive line in the country. You're not taking that far a step down when you go over to Oregon, and there is a question of how much energy was put into that game. How much energy was put into proving everyone wrong, shutting everyone up, making sure everyone believes that you are still Ohio State. How much do you have left to give is the big-time question that we have in this one, and you're going up against an absolutely elite group on the other side. And then you flip to the other side of the ball, it's the exact same thing. Oregon's one of the best, maybe the best offensive line in the country, and then you have one of the best, maybe the best defensive line in the country for Ohio State. So it was won relatively decisively by Oregon the first time around. Obviously, Jack Sawyer is going to try to create a little bit more chaos this time around. But the one guy that I'm watching probably most closely going into this game is Denzel Burke. He had a very forgettable day the first time they met up, and he definitely wants to right that wrong. When he gets Tez Johnson in front of him, he's going to do everything he can to keep him in front of him. He was an absolute nightmare to deal with the first time around, and if Denzel Burke doesn't play much better, then Oregon's going to take advantage of that. The pass game is even better than it was back then, so he's going to have to be ready to roll. That entire back end's going to have to be ready to roll. But this one's going to be great. At the Rose Bowl, two of the best, maybe the two best teams in the country going at it, which is a problem with the format. We will get to fixing the format, I promise you that. But this one's going to be awesome, and I'd have to imagine the winner of this one is going to be the favorite to win the entire thing. And then you have the questionable game to me. You have the most unpredictable game of the bunch. I don't know if anyone else feels this way. Arizona State, Texas would definitely give you a run for your money there. But Gunnar Stockton, what is he like? What do we know about Gunnar Stockton? How much can we take from that SEC championship where we all know how this works? You know, you get thrown in the second half of that game. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of, juice in that stadium. There's a lot of juice in that team, and sometimes it just carries you to the finish line. We saw it on the first drive. Looked absolutely incredible, was running, was doing everything you possibly needed them to do, and then kind of tapered off throughout that game. Kind of struggled through the pick to Jahdae Barron that almost changed that game entirely, but remarkable player. What does it look like when he gets in front of a full 60 minutes in front of one of the best defenses in the entire country? Now, that defense did take a huge hit this past week with Riley Mills. He is going to be out for the year with a torn ACL. He is their best defensive tackle. Howard Cross gives him a good run for his money, but Howard Cross is kind of just playing through an injury right now, has a little bit of a boot on his foot, so Riley Mills is the guy. He's an absolute beast on the interior, and you're going to have to deal with some really good guards in Tate Ratledge and Dylan Fairchild and then Jared Wilson at the center position. It's going to be a ton to deal with. So the Notre Dame secondary is going to have to be asked a lot to do, and that secondary is going to have to be really good in this game. They answered a lot of the questions that I had as we head into that Indiana game. They answered a ton of the questions that I had for that back end. The question is, the play calling is going to be different in this one. If you rewatch a couple of those things, in fact, if you rewatch the Brooks Austin breakdown of that game, really breaks down just how uncreative at times Indiana was in that game and how, I don't want to say easy they made it for Notre Dame, but easier than I assume Georgia will make it for Notre Dame. But at the end of the day, we can talk about the pass game all we want. The Georgia running backs are going to be absolutely huge in this game, especially with Riley Mills out. They did take a hit to this running back room, at least, I believe, a couple of days ago. Roderick Robinson is going to be out for this game. Don't really know the nature of that injury yet, but he is going to be out for this game. Got dinged up in practice. We'll see if he can work his way back for later rounds and how big of a deal it is for him to be out in this one. So it's going to be Trevor Etienne, and he should be fully healthy for this one for the first time in quite some time, so that'll be very nice for Georgia fans. And then you got a couple other guys. You got Nate Frazier, you got Dwight Phillips, you could even put Dylan Bell back there and give him some carries. So there's a couple of different options out there. Branson Robinson should be a little bit more healthy at this point, so it's going to be awesome to watch. This one's going to be pretty low scoring if I had to imagine. It's going to come down to whichever defense can make that one play, I feel like. That one pick six, that one fumble in positive territory, whatever that looks like. And then you get the winner of Penn State, Boise State with a chance to go to the national title. Georgia will be very comfortable in that position. Notre Dame maybe not quite as much, but they absolutely want to be in that position down there in Miami for the Orange Bowl. But going to be incredible matchups all across the place for these quarterfinal games. Obviously, two have a little bit more aggressive lines, two have very, very razor-thin lines. I tend to believe that we're going to get three good games. I think Arizona State has enough in the tank to keep things close against Texas. Boise State, I'd love to fully believe in, but we'll see where I'm standing on Monday. Definitely could change my tune. Maybe I'll just pick Boise State just for the fun of it. But at the end of the day, going to be a really, really fun matchups there. But let's take our first break here. When we come back, let's just get into all the big-time bowl games this weekend. We'll get to Georgia Tech, Vanderbilt, USC, Texas A&M, Iowa State, Miami, as well as BYU, Colorado. A very interesting one, a little bit of a conference game in bowl season. But we'll break them all down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just took a quick look at all those quarterfinal games, got a little bit carried away, but very excited for those games. I feel like we got at least two that I think are going to be absolute classics in Oregon, Ohio State, as well as Notre Dame, Georgia. Will be really interesting to watch what Gunnar Stockton has as that first start as a Georgia Bulldog. Going to be a lot on his plate, especially against that defense. But we'll jump into those in a little bit more detail next week, so be on the lookout for that. But we got to talk about some major bowl games. I want to make sure I give some love to some of these bowl games that I absolutely love coming up this weekend. And we'll start with literally my favorite one of the entire bowl season, Georgia Tech, Vanderbilt. This one's going to be awesome. It's two quarterbacks that I think everyone has come to love throughout this year, in Haynes King and Diego Pavia, especially Diego Pavia over the last little bit. Two beautiful offenses called by Tim Beck and Buster Faulkner, two of my favorite offenses in the entire country, and then two programs that really feel like they're starting to build. Obviously, they've been a little bit behind because some academic rigors at some other schools don't necessarily translate to what Georgia Tech and Vanderbilt have to deal with on the recruiting trail, but at the end of the day, it feels like Brent Key, it feels like Clark Lee have these teams moving in the right direction, and it'll be really interesting to watch what these teams can do in 2025. I feel like we'll be talking about Georgia Tech quite a bit throughout the offseason. This is a very interesting team that I think could make some noise in the ACC going into 2025. But for this game in particular, Georgia Tech does have a better run offense and defense, a little marginally on the defensive side of the ball, a little bit bigger a gap offensively in that department, and the Vandy offense just in general has really tapered since that Bama game. They haven't scored over 24 since that day. They're going to need more than that in this one. If I had to imagine, this Georgia Tech offense feels like it's rolling right downhill. It feels like an offense that they just feel like they know exactly where everything needs to be at every second throughout the game. And Haynes King has a huge part in that, because so much of what they do comes down to, can he make the right read? Can he hand the ball when he absolutely needs to? Can he pull it and go off tackle when he needs to? There are a lot of different things that are put on these two quarterbacks, and they've handled it really incredibly well throughout this year. Georgia Tech's just one of those teams that I feel like has kind of been rising throughout the end of the year, while Vanderbilt has been tapering just a little bit. But both these quarterbacks will be back in 2025 for their team, so won't be the last time that we get to see these guys in those jerseys, and it'll be really fun to see how that kind of unfolds. Obviously, Haynes King has become a fan favorite really over the last couple of years over there at Georgia Tech, and has been a very special player down the stretch of the season. He'll also finally be fully healthy. He wasn't even fully healthy in that Georgia game. We saw what he was able to do. He should be much closer to being healthy in this one, and the guy right next to him, Jamal Haynes, is going to be huge as well, as is Cedric Alexander on the other side for Vanderbilt. We've talked about this a number of times when we talked about Vanderbilt games, but that north-south run is everything. And both these offenses, really, if you can get downhill, if you can run inside zone, duo, all of those types of things in the A gap and B gap, if you can run those very effectively, everything else works. You get the tight end that leaks out on a beneath. You get the read option that you very badly need. You get the power off that. There's so many different things that you can play around with if you can get that north and south game run game going. So those running backs, we talk so much about these quarterbacks, and they are absolutely huge. They are the most important players in this game. Those two running backs are not far behind him. And it'll be interesting to see what this Georgia Tech offense looks like without Eric Singleton, who fills in for that position, how they feel there. Is it Chase Lane that kind of comes in? Is it someone like Bailey Stockton, who came on late in the year? So this is going to be a really awesome game. Two really tough, two gritty quarterbacks that have been so much fun to watch. Vanderbilt looking for their first over 500 season since 2016. But I think they're going to fall short. I like this Georgia Tech team in this one. I think they have too much offense for Vanderbilt, and I think this Vanderbilt offense just makes me a little bit nervous. Hasn't quite hit their stride since that Bama game, and I tend to believe it's going to be really hard to hit their stride in this one. I'll take Georgia Tech to win by about 10 points here. I'll take Haynes King to win that duel, and then hopefully we'll get to see these guys again in some capacity next year, because I just love seeing these two offenses, these two guys face off. We got one late at night over there in Las Vegas as well. USC against Texas A&M. This is kind of an interesting game. We have two teams that have been very active in the portal thus far for very different reasons. We have USC that's seen a ton of big-time players walk out the door. We're able to get Keyshawn Silver and Jamal Jarrett and a couple other big-time guys that I think are going to be great players for them. A&M's been absolutely rolling. They've been picking up a ton of really big-time transfers, definitely getting guys that are going to be immediate helps to them in the next year, and it's going to be really interesting to see what these teams are in 2025. But for the time being, this is what the game we're focusing on. This game first and foremost, Lincoln Riley against Mike Elko. It doesn't get much better than that. It's going to be absolutely incredible to see how Lincoln Riley can attack this A&M defense and vice versa. How can Mike Elko kind of put them off schedule? It is going to be Jaden Mayava making, I believe, his third start, if I'm not mistaken, in a USC jersey. This is going to be the toughest defense that I say that. Notre Dame will probably be the toughest defense that he's faced. So I guess that's not necessarily fair. A&M would be a very close second to the defenses that he's faced thus far. But I think the question for USC is, can they stop the run game of A&M? It's been a question for USC really since Lincoln Riley has shown up. Gotten a little bit better this year in a number of respects, but losing some of the guys they've already lost in the portal, it's going to be that much harder. You have Marcel Reed, who's obviously going to be a problem with his legs. Amari Daniels will be playing in this one, so it's going to be a lot to deal with. Now, on the other side, the A&M pass defense has struggled throughout this year, so it could be a little bit of a battle of styles here where you have USC trying to throw the ball all over the yard. You have A&M just trying to run the ball to victory, trying to control the clock and really just kind of milk this thing to a victory. It'll be interesting to see how all of that kind of unfolds. A&M has shown openings towards the back end of the year, and if anyone can find those openings, it's Lincoln Riley. But overall, USC is just trying to right the ship as you head into this offseason. A&M wants to continue to build, get to that 9th win, move on to 2025, and hope that you can make a little bit deeper of a run into that SEC championship realm. But going to be a really incredible game here, and when I look at it, I just have too many questions about USC. I'm really not sure where they're at. I'm not sure where they're at mentally or physically. I'm going to go with A&M. I think they run the ball to a victory, and I think Marcel Reed moves on to his second year as the starter with a lot of hype around him going into 2025. Then we got this one, maybe the best matchup of the entire bowl season from a perspective of just the teams that are in this game. Now, the one right after it, we'll talk about here in a second, gives us a good a run for its money, but both teams ended their season on a very bad note. Iowa State got boat raced in the Big 12 championship. No other real way to put it at the end of the day. And then for Miami, missed out on the ACC title for that Syracuse loss and was just right on the outside of the CFP looking in. Obviously, Miami wants to finish this thing strong. It sounds like Cam Ward will be on the roster. It sounds like he will be playing in this game. He wants to finish it the right way. He wants to be able to make a statement, maybe bump himself up a little bit in that NFL draft process, but a lot going into this game. Obviously, it's going to be a really interesting offseason. For Miami in particular, still haven't found that quarterback replacement for Cam Ward in the portal. A lot of different things that they're going to have to kind of weigh throughout this offseason, and it'll be interesting to see, how long is Cam Ward in this game? If they go up by 21 points, do they get Emory Williams in there just to see what they have before they start really attacking the portal in some real ways? So a lot of different things to kind of watch, some subplots to watch throughout this game, but Iowa State should be able to find some holes in this Miami back end. They really struggled down the stretch of the season, especially against Syracuse, and Iowa State maybe not quite as prolific as Syracuse is throwing the football, but absolutely has two difference makers on the outside in Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel. It's going to be a load to deal with. But overall, I think it's going to be a really, really fun game. These teams are going to get after each other a little bit. I don't see a ton of defense being played in this one. If I had to imagine, I think Cam Ward's going to put on an absolute show. I think Iowa State has every ability to hang around, but I'm going to pick the best guy on the field. I'm going to pick Cam Ward to go out with the right way to get a big-time win and kind of cement his legacy over there at Miami. Obviously came up a little bit short of what he wanted to this year, but I think he finishes out strong, gets out with a win, and then probably is one of the first names called when you get around to draft night. And then we got the weird tie-in one. We got the Alamo Bowl with technically the Pac-12 and the Big 12 tie-in. Obviously Colorado being that Pac-12 team, but it is a conference game. It is a very interesting conference game, one that Jake Retzlaff called yesterday the People's Big 12 Championship. I wouldn't agree with that, but all respect to you. Definitely going to be a really fun game, and have enjoyed watching these teams immensely throughout the year. It's been incredible to watch what BYU has been able to do with Jake Retzlaff, and on the other side, I don't think anyone picked Colorado to do this. Other than, the people in that building, I don't think anyone picked him to be this good this early. It's been absolutely incredible to watch. Deion Sanders is absolutely someone that I had very, very much on my short list for Coach of the Year. He's been absolutely incredible, and it's going to be the last time we see Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter on a college football field. Enjoy this one, because these are two very, very talented players. Travis Hunter, obviously once-in-a-lifetime type player. Shedeur Sanders, going to be a freak. He's going to be the number one quarterback off the board if I had to imagine in the NFL draft, and it's been a special year for both. They just want to finish it out strong, and you talk about special. That BYU year was absolutely incredible before you got to that Kansas game. Then Kansas, Arizona State kind of shortened that run that could have been really, really fun one. It was going to be incredible to watch BYU just kind of jump in and really take the world by storm after not necessarily getting a lot of love in the preseason, but they fell to Kansas and Arizona State, fell a little bit short, but they got a lot going for them in this game. Can Colorado keep up with BYU's physicality on the offensive line? LJ Martin's a plenty talented running back that will take advantage of openings if you give them. Colorado's going to have to be stout up front, especially without a couple of the big-time guys that have left, including Nikhil Hill-Green, Dayon Hayes have already left the program, so a lot of different things to watch in this one. But the BYU pass defense will be tested in this game. I think Colorado has two guys that are legends of the program right now. I think they're going to go out in the right direction. I think it could be a little bit dramatic with some of the offense that I tend to believe we're going to see in this game, but I'm going to say Shedeur Sanders puts on a show. I'm going to say Travis Hunter gets a pick just for good measure, and I'm going to say Colorado finishes this thing off with a big-time win, gets to 10 wins, and then a lot of different questions as you head into 2025 around Julian Lewis and around Caden Salter and a million different things around that program, but it'll be awesome to watch it. There's no doubt about that. Every time we get to talk about Colorado football, it's something new, it's something interesting, and I'm sure this game will be no different. But we'll break all those down in time throughout the next, probably early next week, but let's get to all the rest of the bowl games. There's been a ton of stuff happening all around bowl season, and it's been going a little bit haywire. If you know what I'm talking about, congratulations. You watched the Pitt-Toledo game. It was absolutely incredible. We'll talk about it all right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a couple of the big-time bowl games coming up this weekend. I want to make sure I got some picks out for that one, including my very favorite one coming up at 3:30 today. Georgia Tech Vanderbilt, going to be an absolutely incredible matchup between two offenses that have been just so much fun to watch throughout this year. But let's get to all the rest of the bowl games. We got a ton of bowl season madness, and it's all overtime. It seems like everyone wants to go to overtime around this time of year, and I've absolutely loved it. It feels like bowl season is kind of being revived just a little bit throughout this year, and hopefully we can keep it rolling into next year. But it's been an incredible start to this, and let's first give you an update on all the games that have already happened, because we got a lot of games to get to. Tons of games on Saturday, so want to make sure you're updated on all the stuff that has happened thus far. UTSA just rolls Coastal Carolina. Really dominant performance, especially from that defense. Nothing on the ground for Coastal Carolina in this game, and UTSA finishes out their season with a big-time win where it was not even in question from the jump. But the rest of them were very much in question very long after the jump. NIU gets a big-time win, 28-20 in double overtime over Fresno State. Was a very fun game. And NIU, they had to start their backup quarterback, Josh Holtz, in this game. Was really good. In relief duty for Ethan Hampton, I believe he caught a touchdown pass. I could be mistaken in that. Maybe he just caught a pass and came up a little bit short, but it was an incredible game. It was absolutely awesome to watch, and a lot of really cool, fun storylines there. And Thomas Hammock had the quote-unquote, these are his words, the best dump of his career. I'm going to leave it at that. You can take with that what you will, but that was quite the quote. But at the end of the day, then we got a little bit crazier. We got a 5 overtime game on Christmas Eve that was just really fun to watch. It was one of those things where you're staying up late on Christmas Eve. You weren't expecting to get a bowl game all the way on Christmas. They got us to midnight. It was an incredible matchup between South Florida and San Jose State, but South Florida came out on top with that craziness that we get into the end of the game that probably does need to be fixed, but in bowl season, it's plenty of fun. I'm very much into it, but Sean Atkins had a huge game in this game for USF, going to be his last game in those colors, so great to see him kind of explode in this one. Oh, excuse me, got a little bit ahead of myself there. Pitt Toledo, a 6 overtime game just to one-up USF or San Jose State. Remarkable game. This one was back and forth. Julian Duggar came in for Pitt, did a great job at quarterback. Kind of a guy that we maybe should be watching as we head into next year. I think it's going to be Eli Holstein, but Julian Duggar will be very ready to go. And then Tucker Gleason was incredible in this game, and a lot of it went to Junior Vandross. He went for almost 200 yards receiving. Remarkable offense from Toledo really throughout this one. Pitt really tried to push him late in that game, but Toledo was able to keep their cool, make that final last play. A couple of crazy things that happened in those double and triple and quadruple overtimes that were reviews and all over the place. But Toledo came out on top. It was very chaotic, but an incredible game. And then we got a really good one after that. We got Kansas State coming back from 17 down in the second quarter, 196 yards from Dylan Edwards, a KSU record in the bowl game. Remarkable performance from all those guys, and definitely a really fun one. We didn't get the battle between Kyle Montague and DJ Giddens that I very much wanted. We got plenty of running back battles in this one, no doubt about that. So it was a really fun game there, and then Arkansas State was able to close this one out. A little bit sketchy towards the end of this game, but Corey Rucker gets the game ball, 107 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns. Harold Fannin, how do people guard this guy? 17 catches, 213 yards, 1 touchdown. He has an FBS record for tight end receiving yards in a season. the kid is an absolute freak, and he's going to be so much fun to watch at the next level. Him and Tyler Warren will be the top two tight ends off the board, and I cannot wait to see what this kid can do. I think he might just have a gold jacket in his future, frankly. Let's get into all the games that are going on today and going into tomorrow, and we'll start with this one. This is a fascinating game to me. Navy's coming off that huge win over Army that they absolutely love to get, and then Oklahoma, they're into the offseason a little bit. They're playing around in the portal here and there, have lost a number of guys, have started to bring in a couple of reinforcements. It will be Michael Hawkins at quarterback once again this season. So they started with Jackson Arnold, went to Michael Hawkins, went back to Jackson Arnold. Now that Jackson Arnold's over in Auburn, Alabama, it will be Michael Hawkins for this game. But this is going to be the last game in a OU uniform for Danny Stutzman. And that's about all I need to know. I think he's going to go absolutely crazy in this game against a run team. The best run defender in the country at linebacker is going to have a huge day. I think Oklahoma wins this game. Probably a pretty ugly win if I had to imagine. Defensive battle, but I do think Oklahoma gets this win. I think Danny Stutzman has 20 tackles at the end of this thing. Texas Tech, Arkansas, a very interesting game here. Two teams that are heading into just massive off seasons. And Texas Tech has really gotten a kickstart in the portal while, while Arkansas has taken blow after blow in that department. They have lost a ton of big-time players. Jaquindon Jackson to the NFL draft and just about everyone else to the portal. It's been an absolute nightmare up there in Fayetteville, but for Texas Tech, they're rolling right along. They'd love to get a win here to just continue to build that momentum. But the question is, for Arkansas, is what is this quarterback battle going to look like? You have Baron Morton, who's played relatively solid football throughout this year, been a little bit up and down at times, and then you have Talon Green, a remarkably athletic kid, one of those guys that when you hit that ceiling, when everything is clicking for him, he can beat just about anyone in the country. Things go wrong pretty quickly, and that's the big question I have here. I don't necessarily think he's going to be able to keep everything the way that he wants it to in this game. I think Texas Tech finishes off the year with a big-time win. I think they move forward and have a very interesting team going into 2025. This is the one that might just be a little bit lopsided, if I had to imagine, because you have a team in Syracuse that is coming off a remarkable win over Miami, a remarkable year one under Fran Brown that seems to be a program that's heading very much in the right direction. And then you got Washington State, who has lost their head coach. They've lost their offensive coordinator. They've lost their starting quarterback. They've lost a number of guys on both sides of the ball that are starters. I don't know what this team's going to look like. I don't know what the depth chart looks like. I don't know who's starting at quarterback, and I probably should if I'm being totally honest, but I don't even know who's starting at quarterback for this Washington State team going into this one. Whoever it is, congratulations. You're probably going to be the quarterback of a great team next year because Cam Moore and John Mateer just kind of set up that way for you, so you might as well just follow that path. But at the end of the day, going to be a really, really fun game here. I just think it's going to be a rout. I think Syracuse has so much going for them in that direction. I think that Washington State defense is going to have just their hands full against that team that can really throw the rock around the yard. It will be Kyle McCord's last game. Could it be his last game? I believe it will be his last game at Syracuse, so going to be one he wants to put on a show in. I tend to believe he will in a big-time win. UConn, North Carolina, a very interesting one because it feels like that line should be bigger. When you see those two teams right next to each other, it just feels like that line should be bigger, but UConn has done an incredible job. Jim Mora has done a great job getting those guys ready to roll and has played some really solid football against some really good teams throughout the year. Pushed NC State to the absolute wire in that one, and they'll try to do the same exact thing here, but UNC, you got to put on a show. You got to show Bill Belichick that you... You got to show Bill Belichick that you are the guy that he wants to keep around rather than the guy that he'd rather see hit the door. And the big one here is going to hit the door at the end of the day is going to be Omarion Hampton. He is out the door one way or the other to the NFL draft, but at the end of the day, I think he dominates in this one. I think he absolutely rolls over UConn. I think he puts on a crazy performance to finish out his North Carolina career that has been absolutely historic, and I think they get a pretty comfortable win here. Boston College, Nebraska, a very interesting game between two teams that Boston College did lose Thomas Castellanos. The thing is, he didn't start down the back half of the season. So it is going to be Grayson James in this one, Dylan Raiola on the other side. It's going to be a really fun game. I think Nebraska is looking at this offseason with a lot of question marks, with a lot of things that they're going to have to fix. This would be a nice kickstart. There's no doubt about that. They've already brought in a couple of big-time transfers that we'll talk about here in a second, but really, really talented players all across the field for this game. I'm going to lean towards Nebraska. I know it sounds crazy, and if it's a one-score game, I'm going to be really regretting that decision, but I'll go with Nebraska in this one. I'll lean their direction, and we'll see if they can really build off that one going into 2025. Louisiana TCU, a very interesting matchup here between two quarterbacks that are very much under the radar, but very, very fun to watch. Ben Woolridge over at Louisiana can throw the rock around, play some really good football, definitely can make some plays with his legs. Josh Hoover, the exact same thing. He just cannot get out of my head, him and Max Duggan. They feel like the same exact player to me. They feel like a guy that could really explode in 2025 if he's put in the right situations. Definitely going to be really interesting to watch as you get into 2025. But for this game in particular, I'm watching Cam Cook. He's been the running back all year. The run game has been absolutely terrible for TCU. This might be an opening where you can get him that game, that one game that he really needs going into 2025, where I think he could be an absolute star. I think this might just be that game. I think Cam Cook puts on a little bit of a show. I think TCU wins this one and give me the points. I'll take them by at least 14 in this game. Miami of Ohio against Colorado State, two of the really fun teams in the Group of 5 this year. Miami of Ohio came up short against Ohio in that MAC title. Colorado State came just short of a Mountain West title berth against Boise State. Two very experienced quarterbacks in Brett Gabbert and Braden Fowler-Nicolosi. Going to be a really interesting matchup here. Both teams very solid defenses, especially Colorado State. That was kind of the reason that they were rolling as well as they were, but at this one, I just think Colorado State has too much. I think Torrey Horton is going to be a player that's going to make some type of play in this game. Is he playing in this game, frankly? That is something I'll be on the lookout for. I'm not actually sure if he's playing in this game or not. I think there will be enough offense for Colorado State in this one, and I think they'll just be suffocating on the defensive side of the ball. So I'll pick Colorado State, get them to 9 wins on the year. A little bit of an upset here, but not by too much. Then we got a battle for North Carolina here. East Carolina against NC State. Going to be a really fun one. Caden Hauser, who came over from Michigan State this past year, has done a great job at East Carolina. Has been a really, really good player for them. And then CJ Bailey, a guy that I cannot wait to watch in 2025. I'll get one more look at him in 2024, and I think it's going to be a really, really fun one to watch. Both defenses definitely have the ability to slow this thing down and cause issues for these offenses, so it's going to be really interesting to watch. It's going to be a fun battle between two teams that I think East Carolina hasn't quite gotten the respect they deserve throughout the season. NC State probably didn't deserve too much respect, but I think this will be a CJ Bailey show. I think they'll get plenty of respect after this game because I think CJ Bailey is special. I think he has every ability to be one of those guys that bursts onto the scene next year, takes his team to a possible ACC title. I think it starts here. Even without Kevin Concepcion, I'm going to take this NC State team to make a big-time statement here. And then Louisiana Tech against Army, the one that has a little bit of interesting dynamics here. It was going to be Marshall right up until that Navy game that Army played that came out on the wrong side of, but it flipped over to Louisiana Tech because they were in Shreveport, so huge shout out to them for even being able to play in this game, but remarkable game, and we get to see Bryson Daly do his thing. I think there's no analysis here. There's no breaking it down. It's a 16.5-point spread. I think Bryson Daly goes to work in this one. I think he's very mad about the performance that he put on against Navy. I think he wants to get to 12 wins, and I very much think he will. I'll take the Black Knights to roll in this one, probably win by 21, 28 points if I had to imagine. But a lot of really fun bowl games. You know, bowl season has been one of those things that over the past couple of years we started to bury, started to say it doesn't matter to these players, to these coaches, because they're opting out and everything. The reality is we've gotten some great matchups, and if you see the passion on those kids' faces, it matters to them. There's no doubt about that. So, bowl season, making a minor comeback. I'm trying not to hold out hope too much because it tends to be when something good is happening, there's something bad right on the horizon for college football. But at the end of the day, I'm going to enjoy this while I can. We have a ton of players that are not opting out, deciding to play. We have a ton of really fun games. It's been an awesome bowl season as we head into this 12-team playoff that is about to get really crazy. The bowl season's kind of got us ready for that. So, been an incredible time, but we'll break those down obviously more and more throughout the week. We'll break down all the results from this past weekend, but definitely want to get to all the transfer portal news because there's been quite a lot. It's kind of tempered down over the last little bit. A lot of guys going out, not quite as many coming in, so feels like we're coming to a little bit of a lull, but plenty of updates I want to get on y'all's plate before we get to hopefully a little bit of a lull in the transfer portal, but we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the big-time bowl games from this upcoming weekend. Definitely a lot of craziness that has already happened. Have to assume it's going to follow us into the weekend. We'll get a couple of great ones, including Miami, Iowa State, one of the ones that I am most excited for, and then we just get BYU, Colorado, just for fun as well. So, going to be an incredible weekend in the bowl season, but let's get into a little bit of transfer portal update, because we got a lot of guys walking out the door. We got a lot of guys making their decisions, finding their new place to play, and seems like it's tempering down just a little bit. Obviously, we'll have different guys kind of pop in from bowl games and from CFP races throughout the down stretch, but at the end of the day, feels like we're at least coming to a little bit of a lull in the transfer portal world, but plenty of guys came off the board in the last little bit that I want to make sure are on your radar, and this is probably the biggest one of the bunch. Fernando Mendoza has decided he is going to go to Indiana. Huge pickup for Indiana. This is a guy that NFL scouts have really, really loved throughout this year. Big reason why he got into the portal, frankly, was because of that, and it looks like he's going to hang out with Curt Cignetti over the next little bit. It's going to be a really interesting thing to watch. Definitely a very talented player. Hasn't quite hit the, strides that Curtis Rourke had going into this job, so will be really interesting to see what he can do, but I think this kid can be an absolute star. Maybe it's not next year right away like it was for Curtis Rourke. I don't think it'll take long. Very, very talented kid, and I think he's going to keep that Indiana Hoosier train rolling pretty good over the next little bit. Aaron Nolan, one of my favorite players in the quarterback position, really in the entire country, and he hasn't touched the field yet. But he has transferred from Ohio State to South Carolina, and that South Carolina quarterback room looking really good right about now. Lenora Sellers coming back for next year, one of the best quarterbacks in the entire SEC, and then you got this kid waiting in the wings, and he is as physically talented as you will ever find. You watch this kid throw a football, it's different than just about everything you've ever seen. Kind of fits with Aaron Nolan. If you're going to have a name like Aaron Nolan, you better be able to throw the rock around. He absolutely can. Very special player, and I would assume he's going to take the reins from number 16 when Lenora Sellers hangs him up around there. Mikey Keene is going to go over to Michigan. He's going to be the new Michigan quarterback. The question is, what is the dynamic here? Is it a break glass in case of emergency if Bryce Underwood doesn't quite work out the way you want him to? I tend to believe he's going to pan out just fine, but just in general, this could be kind of a break glass in case of emergency. It could also be, this guy's going to be the starter, and then we'll get the young kid ready. It's what Auburn's doing with Jackson Arnold and Deuce Knight. It's what a number of people are doing all around the country, so maybe that's the way they're going. I'd be a little bit surprised if Bryce Underwood wasn't the first guy to trot out there in week one, but we'll see what happens. Very talented quarterback, and at the very least, if he is a backup option, will be a very good backup option. Very talented and has played a ton of football over there at Fresno State. Caden Velkamp, this is a little bit more of under the radar one, maybe not quite as important in the world of college football in 2025, but I just love this fit. He is going on his way to Boca Raton to join Zach Kittley at FAU. This just feels like a perfect fit to me. I think Zach Kittley with Caden Velkamp, I think they could really take off. It's going to be so much fun to watch what Zach Kittley can do in his first year at FAU, and I think he's got a quarterback that can really get him there. It's going to be so much fun to watch what this offense is, but definitely really love Caden Velkamp, and I think he might just be a star in the G5 next year. Justice Haynes. Sounds like Michigan's got their guy in the running back room. There's still a little bit. I saw over on 24/7 they didn't quite have him as a committed, quote-unquote, but I've seen some reports out there. I feel pretty confident that he is going to be a Michigan Wolverine, and this is a remarkably talented kid. He just needs reps as far as I'm concerned. You just need to hand the ball to him. He will get better and better, and I think he could be an absolute star by the end of next season. Him and Jordan Marshall going to be a really special duo over there at Michigan at running back position that's become very comfortable for them. They always have a really remarkable duo. This might be the most talented duo they've had in quite some while now. They are obviously a little bit more inexperienced than the other group that they just had, but at the end of the day, two very talented kids, and Justice Haynes is one that I think could just be an outright star in 2025. This might be one of my favorite pickups of the entire portal cycle. Ohio State has their running back one for 2025 if Quinshon Judkins and TreVeyon Henderson head out the door. I tend to believe that's what they'll do, but I think Quinshon Judkins is a little bit still up in the air. But definitely something to watch here. CJ Donaldson, really good player. He's a guy that was at West Virginia, didn't quite get the love that a lot of these other running backs around the country got, but this is a very talented kid. This is a guy that I think will be a household name by the time next year. He is someone that, given the right resources, given the right offense, and given a couple of wide receivers that can take some pressure off him, this kid can make so many different plays. I think this is a fantastic pickup, and it was one of two pickups for Ohio State that was fantastic, and we'll talk about the other one here in a second. But some more running backs came off the board. Fluff Bothwell, one of my favorite running backs from this past year at South Alabama. He's making his way up to Stark Vegas. He will be a part of the Mississippi State football team this upcoming year. I just love what Mississippi State is doing in the portal. We'll talk about them here in a second here, but been really remarkable to see what they've been able to do. Hasn't been necessarily that big-time flashy guy, but has picked up some very, very talented kids that are going to be huge pieces in 2025. Dane Key, huge win for Nebraska here. This is one that they badly needed, especially with a couple of guys walking out the door and maybe not getting the production that you expected from a couple of those guys that came in the door this past time around. He does reunite with Da'Keil Shorts, who left Kentucky earlier this offseason when Dana Holgorsen officially took the job as the OC at Lincoln. He made his way up there as well, and Dane Key was not shortly after him. Georgia was very much in on this recruitment. I think some things with the JUCO rule has changed that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but definitely someone to watch, and definitely a guy that I think could just explode next year. I think he could be one of the best wide receivers in the Big Ten next year, frankly. Malachi Fields, he was the big name on the market for quite some time, and this feels like the guy that Notre Dame has not had in quite some time at wide receiver. He's so talented. One of those guys that when you're watching Virginia, respectfully, there's not quite a ton that you necessarily love about that team, and then you see number 8 play football, and it's absolutely special to watch. I think this past game for Notre Dame could be really fun, whether it's CJ Carr, Steve Angeli, whatever that looks like. It's going to be a group that's going to be much more talented on the outside than Notre Dame has had in a very long time. I can't remember how long, but quite some time around there. Emmanuel Henderson is a guy that I absolutely love. I think Kansas just got one. I think this is a huge pickup for them. They need difference makers, especially with that trio of NFL wide receivers walking out the door. It's going to be huge. They're going to have a difference maker on the outside, and boy, is this guy a difference maker on the outside. I think him and Jalen Daniels could be a very fun connection next year. We talked about Ohio State earlier. This was another huge win for Ohio State. This is a great pass catcher at tight end, and I don't know if anyone else kind of feels this, but this Ohio State offense feels like they're missing that tight end. Feels like they're missing that Cade Stover. It feels like they're missing that guy that kind of makes all these wide receivers so special because they can get on the outside on one-on-one because he's occupying the linebacker, he's occupying one of the safeties. That's exactly what Max Clare is going to do. He's such a good pass catcher, and I think in that offense could really start to flourish. Micah Pettis, very talented offensive lineman from Ole Miss, did a great job this past year. He's making his way over to Tallahassee. He's going to be a Seminole this next year and a huge pickup for Florida State. I think all of us are looking at Florida State kind of with a side eye this time around just to make sure that everything is in order before they go into next year. But overall, I think this is a very solid pickup and almost definitely will be an immediate starter over there. Another big-time offensive lineman that came off the board is Thomas Rematch. He was a fantastic player at West Virginia for a number of years, and then Virginia Tech was able to pull him in. This is huge for Virginia Tech. It cannot be overstated how bad of a portal era that they've had this time around, and they're badly going to need this one. Very talented player, will be a plug-and-play guy, and they've lost a ton of really talented players on that offensive line. Needed this one very badly. And then we got two guys here, TJ Searcy and Sam Mpemba. Love these pickups for A&M. I think these are two guys that haven't quite hit that necessarily peak that you kind of expect from them, but they're very talented players. I think it could be absolute stars, especially Sam Mpemba. The athleticism on that kid is absolutely ridiculous. I think he's going to be an absolute freak, and I think A&M got two guys on that edge rushing that could really be stars. You have obviously Nick Scourton walking out the door, likely Cassius Howell as well. Definitely will be an interesting thing to watch, but overall, these are two guys that I think could just become household names by the time we get to 2025. But all those guys have come off the board. We got a ton of big-time classes that have started to form throughout this thing. Texas Tech sits at the top. They've been sitting at the top for quite some time. They've been remarkably aggressive in this format. LSU and Ole Miss starting to build up. Deuce Alexander, the wide receiver from Wake Forest, is the top guy for Ole Miss right now. A great pickup for them. And then LSU has just gotten D lineman after D lineman, especially with Patrick Payton, a great pickup there. Done an incredible job filling the very obvious holes that they need to fill. Zadir Mitchell was a great pickup on the interior, but going to be really awesome to watch what they can do next year, especially with some of those reinforcements up front. Auburn continues to build what they need to build, and they got the top wide receiver in Eric Singleton, Xavier Chaplin, fantastic offensive tackle that they brought in, and then they rebuilt that quarterback room with Ashton Daniels, with Jackson Arnold, two guys that absolutely will be big parts of that offense. Jackson Arnold almost definitely will be the starter for this team, and then we'll see what happens from there. But a lot of work had to be done for Auburn, and they've done a very good job kind of backfilling that roster a little bit. Mississippi State has done an incredible job. We talked about them a little bit before, but it's been really awesome to see what Jeff Lebby has done. He hasn't necessarily picked up that big-time guy. I think he's picked up guys that fit his system incredibly well. I think he's going to put on an absolute show next year, and maybe they won't get to, 10 wins. Maybe they won't do anything crazy. I think they could be the spoiler of the SEC next year if things fall their way. But moving on to the back five, Florida State, they just look like a team that it looks good. All the numbers look incredible. All the players look incredible. The stars are there. All of that stuff is there. I just can't fully buy in. Until I see those guys lace them up and get on the football field, I won't feel confident in this team. I loved Malik Benson going into this year. I loved a lot of the guys that they brought in going into this year, and it fell all flat. So now I'm looking at this roster and saying, you got a lot of talented guys. You got a lot of guys that I really, really do like, and I tend to believe are going to be good players. I can't feel confident in that anymore. So I'm going to make Florida State earn it. I'm going to make Florida State, I'm going to hold out on that one really until August, if I'm being totally honest. But it'll be interesting to see who they can bring in. They've done a great job thus far, and I have to assume they'll continue to build that one. Kentucky, I think, has done a great job. Cutter Boley will be the starter next year if I had to imagine, and they're building around him really solidly. Dante Dowdle is going to be a great running back that came over from Nebraska. You have Kendrick Law coming over from Alabama. Maybe it's Zach Calzada starting at quarterback, but at the end of the day, I do believe it's going to be Cutter Boley. I think that talent is just undeniable. And then Wisconsin, I think, has done a really, really incredible job. Billy Edwards is a guy that, if you watch those games, very talented quarterback behind a very untalented offensive line. All due respect to all those guys. You made life tough for them for a number of those things. But A&M continues to do good work as of late. Same thing with Nebraska. They've really started to ramp up things, and it's a fun group up there at the 10. It really gives you an idea of a couple of these teams that could break out. Maybe it's Texas Tech in the Big 12 championship. Maybe Florida State fully bounces back. Maybe Kentucky can find a little bit of lightning in the bottle, as well as Wisconsin. So a lot of really fun teams that are being very aggressive thus far. I'm sure we'll see a couple others in the playoff right now get a little bit more aggressive down the stretch here. And then the top 10 available guys. Zachariah Branch continues to lead the way. It feels like it's going to be Georgia. We haven't had any concrete news over the last couple of days. I know he was there recently, but I would lean the Dogs here. I think Texas is going to push really hard to try to get this one on campus because I think this is just a perfect fit in that offense. But at the end of the day, I would lean the Georgia Bulldogs right now. They've done a great work on this one, and I'd expect them to lock this one up. Kevin Concepcion has been very quiet over the last little bit in his recruitment. Likely will set up a couple more visits after the new year. Bama's my gut here right now, but I think there's a lot of more dominoes to fall in this one. I think this is going to be one of the more drawn-out ones, and whoever gets him is getting an absolute dude. There's no doubt about that. Jeanty Cook, a little bit of news here. Florida State seems like it's theirs to lose as of right now in that Florida State wide receiver room. Remarkably talented group. And also, he gets to play the team that he very badly wants to play in Texas. It sounds like he feels like he got disrespected just a little bit around there and definitely wants to show them his stuff. I would bet it's going to be Florida, and he's going to be very excited for that rematch against his old team. And then Josh Thompson is someone to watch. Very, very highly touted offensive lineman. Tennessee thought they had him locked up, but then LSU and Auburn kind of came into the mix. It seems like it's a three-horse race between those two or between those three, and it'll be really interesting to watch who wins out. For some reason, I'm leaning LSU. I don't really have a good reason for it. I just think when you look at those offensive tackles that just walked out of there, how do you not take the chance on that one? So I'll lean LSU in that one. We'll see if I have egg on my face when that decision is finally final, but some really remarkable players here that are still on the board. It'll be interesting to see what happens down the stretch of this one. But feels like we're tampering down just a little bit throughout the back end of this season. Obviously, we'll have that 5-day period after a team loses in the CFP. Players will start to filter in. There's no doubt about that. Some have already said they're going to filter in, and their team hasn't lost yet, so there will be more. There's no doubt about that, but it feels like we're in a pretty good spot where we're tempering down just a little bit. We're making things just a little bit easier for ourselves, making things a little bit less hectic. I'm sure there will be many more ers and ahs throughout this thing, but tentatively, I'm going to say that things are tempering down, and the transfer portal. Never want to say anything definitively about the transfer portal, but I'll roll with we're tempering down right now, and we'll definitely see where it goes from here. But let's take our last break, and when we come back, we got a ton of just miscellaneous to update you on. You have Deshaun Jackson possibly taking a job in college football. Seems like that's pretty much set in stone now. Deion Sanders and his game insurance. We have Ryan Day probably was going to be safe regardless of that Tennessee performance, and a lot of other stuff on the other side of this break, so stick with us. Alright, excuse me. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the transfer portal. A lot of guys came off the board, Fernando Mendoza being the biggest of the bunch. Indiana has their new play caller. It'll be really interesting to see what happens there, and definitely a very talented kid, maybe not quite as far along as Curtis Rourke was going into that situation, but will be really fun to see what he can do and possibly have his name called here pretty soon in the NFL draft. But let's get into the weekend catch-up, because there's a lot of different stuff that has happened throughout this week, a lot of just different miscellaneous news, and I want to start with one that really caught me off guard. I don't know if it caught you guys off guard quite as much as it got me, but Deshaun Jackson seems like he's going to be coaching in college football next year. It sounds like Delaware State has reached out to him to be their new head coach. I get it, it's Delaware State, might not be the most team that you're going to watch the most in 2025, but it feels like this coaching cycle has been one of the weirdest of the bunch. We have Mike Vick over at Norfolk State now. We have Bill Belichick at UNC. We have so many different storylines that maybe aren't around the team as much as they are around the coach, but going to be really interesting to watch. One way or the other, this thing is going to be very, very fascinating, and definitely will be one of those things that I'll probably hold out judgment on a little bit. Definitely going to be a big-time question mark as you head into that thing, but maybe he makes something happen up there in Delaware and makes that team a very interesting team going forward. But craziness in this college football coaching cycle, and there's just another layer to that. Moving over to Deion Sanders and that bowl game insurance that they're getting for the Alamo Bowl. This is something that bounced around Twitter, and people made a huge deal out of it. People made not big of a deal out of it. This is a fantastic idea. There's no doubt about that. I think it's a great, great idea, and it's not necessarily something that's overly new. There have definitely been different instances throughout the years that people have done this leading up to a bowl game for those guys that are going into the draft, but obviously something that you want to kind of publicize more, I guess is the best way to put it. I would love to see this kind of become commonplace across all of these different bowl games, make sure that we can kind of cover these guys as much as we possibly can, because the reality is you're not just losing a draft position. You're not just dropping from 10 or 1 to 10 or 10 to 20. you're losing millions of dollars. It is a huge, huge difference what it looks like to be picked at number 32 in the draft and number 33 in the draft. And that's the difference that can be made from some of these injuries in these games. So this is something that should be common sense at this point, if I had to imagine. Hopefully it's something that will encourage others to do this and more bowl games to get involved in this type of thing. I have to assume it's Aflac doing this one, so maybe we'll get a couple more Aflac type things in the near future. But the biggest thing to me is hopefully it encourages more people to play. It feels like it's encouraged definitely Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter to play in this game. Hopefully it's something that if we can implement it across every single bowl game, everyone will love it at the end of the day. So the last time we get to see those two guys on the field, and seems like this had a big thing to do with it. So huge shout out to Dion, huge shout out to all the people around Colorado for thinking of this and putting this into action, because it gives us another chance to see number 2 and number 12 on the field together, and it's been a special thing to watch the last couple of years. Have to imagine it's going to be a special thing to watch tomorrow. But moving forward to Ryan Day, this was the most interesting news of the past week. It sounds like Ryan Day will not be fired. I'll lead it with that. Sounds like he wasn't going to be fired even if they lost to Tennessee. The more and more I hear about this story, and obviously I'm not quite as in the know as a couple other people out there, so I do my best to lean on some other people that are a little bit more locked in on a lot of different things around the college football world, and it really does feel like he's not going anywhere. It felt like even if they lost to Tennessee, he wasn't going anywhere. And there's a lot of different things at play here. The buyout is, I believe, around $65 million, which absolutely plays into this conversation. The other part of it is something we talked about last week. Marcus Freeman just signed an extension. So did Curt Cignetti. So did a lot of not Marcus Freeman. I'm blanking on his name. The Iowa State head coach, Matt Campbell. That's what I'm looking for. But a lot of talented coaches have signed their extensions. So you could go out and you could let Brian Hartline take over the program, which would be a big-time ask for someone like that. You could ask Mike Vrabel to come in and take over the program. But again, I think that's a huge ask for him. So overall, it's been tough. It's been a very, very tough stretch. They're 1-4 against Michigan under him, 2-3 in the CFP, 65-3 against every other opponent that he's faced. It's been a weird time over there in Columbus over the last little bit, but it sounds like regardless of what happened, got a little bit ahead. It sounds like regardless of what happened in that Tennessee game, and regardless of what happens going forward, he's going to be the coach in Columbus in 2025. Not necessarily what I expected. I'll be totally honest with you. I thought he at least had to get to the championship game to kind of save himself there. It sounds like he's safe, which will be a really interesting thing to watch throughout the rest of the little bit. Probably shouldn't have released this story if I had to imagine. I would have kept the pressure on him if I'm being totally honest. I would have said he could very well be fired at the end of this game, because maybe that team will come out just as angry in this one. But overall, it's a complicated situation. There's plenty of people that will say this is a smokescreen and they don't fully buy it, and if they lose to Oregon, he's going to get fired. That definitely could happen. I'm not necessarily arguing that. That's definitely something that could happen. I don't expect him to be let go. I think it will be Ryan Day going into next season. I thought, even 2 weeks ago, I thought he was going to be let go. Doesn't sound like that was going to be the case, and doesn't sound like it will be the case going forward. So Ohio State fans, take with that for what you will. If you lose on Wednesday, doesn't seem like you're going to be losing your head coach as well. So something to watch. Definitely going to be a really interesting time. Hopefully they win that game and they don't have to worry about that part of it, but definitely will be really interesting to watch throughout the next couple of weeks. The JUCO eligibility rule that we talked about last week with Diego Pavia, he won his battle with the NCAA in that respect. The NCAA has appealed that ruling on Diego Pavia. Now, it's going to take some time to do that. So they have given kind of a blanket eligibility to all of those types of players in 2025. So Diego Pavia is the main person that's kind of affected by this. But also Colby Young, a very talented wide receiver for UGA that had was off the field for the back half of the season, had some charges that were filed against him from his girlfriend. They have since been dropped. He has since been cleared of those. It'll be interesting to see if he's back at Georgia next year. How much does he play into the game plan? How much is he actually playing? A lot of questions around Colby Young. I'll leave it at that for the time being. Very talented kid, obviously. Definitely someone that Georgia would love to have on the roster going into next year, and it sounds like they will. Unless he finds his way somewhere else, he will be on that roster and will be a big piece for them. I tend to believe that's kind of a big reason why Dane Key found his way up to Nebraska. feels like Georgia's pretty content about where they are wide receiver-wise, especially if they can lock in Zachariah Branch over the next little bit. But it's going to be really interesting to watch this unfold. This is one of those things that I've talked about it. I don't love the ruling. I very much hope that they overturn that ruling going forward after 2025. But for the time being, we'll be able to see a couple of these guys for one more year. It's going to be a nightmare behind the scenes for all of the player personnel people trying to figure out all of this craziness, especially going down to 105 from 125 players on your roster. It's going to be a nightmare. They're going to have to figure out one way or the other, and it could lend itself to some group of 5 teams getting some very, very talented players on the other side of this. But going to be fascinating to watch that unfold, and definitely a lot of players that were very excited when that thing came over, was officially approved. Then we got to talk about the CFP rankings. People really had some problems. People really started to say, you have the NFL on the same day. They're going to get dwarfed, especially with these blowouts. It's going to look terrible. Didn't look all that terrible. Ohio State got up to 14.6 million across. I believe their peak was somewhere up at 16.5 million. We got a lot of really, really incredible performances. The Ohio State game was 35th out of 74 total CFP games. It's pretty good for your first time around on a Saturday that you don't normally play when you have the NFL to compete with all that different stuff. It's a very, very solid showing, and I hope that this keeps these games on that Saturday, because the reality is you got to play on Saturday. Plain and simple. Saturday is our day. The NFL hopefully will rethink things just a little bit. Hopefully we took a little hunk out of their pie in this one, and hopefully they will kind of dial back those December Saturday games. But overall, really good showing from the CFP games this weekend, even with all the blowouts. I think it will be really interesting to watch. One of the kind of subplots here is the TNT games did not do nearly as well as the ABC ESPN games. Definitely something to watch as you move forward. Will TNT get the same love? Will they get some of those sub-licensing contracts that they've gotten this year? Will they get them going forward, especially with how it performed this time around? So a lot of different things that were going into this, and a lot of people that were worried that if the ratings weren't quite as good as they wanted them to be, would they pull off that Saturday and let the NFL have it? Sounds like we're safe, at least for the time being, for right now. So definitely will be something to watch going forward, but very solid ratings for the first time around the 12-team playoff. And then you got a couple other things. The CFP, sounds like some changes are being considered all around. There are conversations being had behind closed doors. No big-time decisions being made, at least as of right now, but there will definitely be a lot of them coming up here pretty soon. But there's definitely a couple that we've talked about in a number of different ways, including governance. It's something that is absolutely obvious. The NCAA can't handle this anymore. Whether it's the CFP that takes over college football, that takes over the group or the Power 4, Power 5 conferences, whatever that looks like, you're going to have to change that one way or the other. Then you have the Group of 8, which is essentially just the SEC Big Ten conundrum. Do those ACC, Big 12, Pac-12, all of those schools, do they just kind of end up falling into the same realm here pretty soon? If the SEC and the Big Ten continue to consolidate their power, do those conferences essentially become Group of 5 conferences at the end of the day, and then it's just the two standing up top in the SEC and the Big Ten? You're obviously trying to avoid that, but when those conversations are had, the two most powerful guys in the room are always Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti. So definitely going to be something to watch there. You also have some seeding implications. Oh, apologies for that. You have some seeding implications that absolutely will be a big part of this. It sounds like giving up auto buys is going to be on the table. Maybe reseeding could be on the table. So a lot of things being kicked around there, and I think anyone that's been watching these games has noticed this seeding is a little bit out of whack. So that's something that I hope they are able to change going into next year, so we just see what it looks like with a 12-team playoff with right seeding, because I think that would solve a lot of the problems. I think that would make a lot of people more happy, and I think it would make the product a whole lot better at the end of the day. So it'll be interesting to watch if they can implement that and how much that'll kind of affect the future changes they make. And then you have automatic qualifiers. Do they give the SEC 3, 4? Do they give the Big Ten 3 or 4? Do they give the ACC 2 or 1 or 0? A ton of stuff being discussed there, and a ton of people arguing some different positions. Two interesting ones here are the idea of weekly rankings. do we give out weekly rankings for the CFP? In college basketball, they do Selection Sunday. They just do it all at once. They say, this is the bracket that you have. A lot of people are still very mad, but at the end of the day, they say, this is the bracket that you have. Joe Lunardi does a good job of updating it throughout the year, but there's not this big extravaganza every week where you have to figure out what the field looks like every 2 seconds. I tend to believe you could do one per month, and I think it would be more than fine. I also think it would help people not be so reactionary. And a lot of these rankings that really have hurt some teams throughout the season, I think it would be a great thing just to kind of let this be the first Saturday or the first Sunday every month, something like that. Whatever it looks like, but definitely kind of play around with this a little bit. I don't think we need one every single week. I think it just creates more chaos and more problems. But the other one that I think is fascinating is game sites. It sounds like this is going to be the biggest one that people are pushing for. We saw those home atmospheres. They were downright special, and could be a couple more home games in the future. In the FCS level, they do it all the way up to the championship game. I'd be a little bit surprised if they did it all the way up there, but maybe one more round. Maybe the quarterfinal games would have been happening at home field advantages this time around. Arizona State would have been hosting Texas. Would have been a great advantage for them, no doubt about that, and definitely even the scales a little bit there. Boise State hosting Penn State, same exact thing. Would be really, really fun to see if that could have an effect. So that's definitely something to watch going forward. I think everyone loved the home atmospheres that we got, and it makes sense that people want to push a little bit more in that direction. I'm a little bit indifferent about this one. I tend to think that once we get past the first round, I'd love to have a neutral site just to have it as up in the air as possible, but fully understand why the home atmospheres have been so incredible and why people would definitely like to lean in that direction. So it'll be interesting to watch how all of this unfolds. Obviously, the CFP is going to be a huge topic of conversation. Over the next month or so, we'll talk about the games, and then we'll get right into what's going to change about this sport going into 2025 and beyond. But at the end of the day, going to be an incredible weekend of all these bowl games. Enjoy them all, because the reality is not one has missed for me. I've watched a ton of these games, and all of them have me on the edge of my seat every single time. So it's been an incredible bowl season, and then we'll be back next week to talk about all those quarterfinal games. Likely we'll break down Penn State, Boise State on Monday, and then the other three on Tuesday if I had to imagine, but definitely keep your eye out on that one. We will update you on that on Monday, but going to be an incredible weekend. Enjoy it all, and got to do a little bit of an outro here. But thank you so much for listening to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every single sport you could want. We will get a little bit more into the groove here pretty soon, where we have shows every day for you guys, so definitely be locked in on the YouTube page, and I will be back on Monday. No doubt about that. I'll be back on Monday to break down some of the bowl game results, to break down that Boise State-Penn State game, and so much more. So I will see you then. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you back here on Monday.